good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the first webinar hosted by the Seychelles National Museum and ICOM Seychelles. I'm going to mute all of you, but when it's time for you to do your presentation, you'll unmute yourself. Okay? Every year, the Natural History Museum organizes activities to commemorate the Environment Day on 5th June. But due to the pandemic going around, the activity schedule were canceled. Instead, we decided to do a webinar to pass on the conservation messages to the maximum people we can reach. There will be 7 speakers and each will have 10 minutes for their presentation. To begin with, I will invite Mrs. Beridon Jake to do a welcoming remarks for the webinar.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Our environment, our people, and the diversity of cultures form part of the country's national heritage, the Seychelles. Preservation of the natural heritage is our responsibility. Our environment means everything that surrounds us. It consists of the earth, the air, and the water, and living thing and non-living thing components. The planet is a community of life which is made up of all kinds of creatures, including men. The survival of all creatures depends essentially on the situation of the planet. Men depend directly and indirectly on other forms of life. Men cannot survive without the environment. Global changes that we are experiencing now tell us that we face a future full of environmental challenges. In addition, what happened in one region of the planet affects all others, and in short, we face serious crises. But this is not the end of the world. It is possible to reshape the future and change how our action affects the planet. This requires unified effort. We need to conserve our environment, and conservation means the wise use of the planet and its resources for the lasting good of men. Conservation is a fundamental responsibility of every human being. Conservation of the environment is everyone's serious business. Early human way of living was in harmony with the environment due to their small population size and density. But they were able to sustain themselves without too much effort. But today, due to population explosion, human activities have replaced nature as a major force in bringing about environmental changes. Changes are degrading the environment and depleting natural resources, and it is necessary to develop appropriate intervention that will mitigate the negative impact of our action. Since all things in the natural world are connected, the museum collection has great potential to educate about the conservation of the environment. Museums as education centers have great potential to stress the interdependence of Earth and its life, and to foster greater public understanding of the environment, its history, and its future. There is an urgent need for the National Museum to start putting more effort in participating actively in conservation of the environment through innovative displays and educational programs. The Natural History Museum is in a unique position to convey convincing information to an engaged audience. By the very act of passing through the doors, visitors are predisposed to learning. Issues such as climate change, renewable energy, and many more. Educating people on these issues will have a real and tangible effect for example, conservation policies, and more broadly, on what communities value. Natural History Museum as a public institution is one of the few settings for direct interaction and communication of objective information between conservation science and the general public. The rate of diversity loss is accelerating. Species are threatened with extinction or introduced in new environments. There's still much more work to do in order to educate our people about importance to protect the biodiversity, which is part of our natural heritage. Let me close by saying that the National Museum will continue its work by actively getting involved in the conservation work and propagate the appropriate message through different mediums at our disposal, ensuring the conservation message of our environment becomes an international and a national lyrics that everyone knows how to sing the song. We can all put our effort together so that the future generation can also enjoy the God's given gift. Please know that conservation is vital, but extinction is forever. Before winding up, I must say a big thank you for all our partners for being so generous with your time. I know you all have a very busy schedule, but I must say a big thank you for your time, and we look forward for your valuable contribution. Thank you.
Mr. Nyambe will do a keynote speech for the webinar.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is a pleasure to be part of this particular webinar. I am very thankful to the National Museums of Seychelles for organizing this particular webinar on safeguarding the Seychelles biodiversity and its conservation work. We're proud as ICOM, the International Council of Museums, that also ICOM Seychelles has been active together with the National Museums of Seychelles and working together to protect and think about our environment. And it is very important, certainly, for us to think about this environment. And it is great that the museum could think of this. And I'm very happy to see. And I would like to, at this juncture, to recognize the presence of the PS for Seychelles, Madame Cecile Kalebi, that is with us in this webinar. May I also take this opportunity to also recognize the presence of our East African representative from UNESCO, Madame Caroline Montil, and we want to also thank her for all the support she keeps showing to the museum world here in the African continent and particularly in East Africa and the adjacent ocean islands. I am very happy and I also feel honored that I could be part of this particular webinar. And it is very, very important because we're talking about the environment. And I would just like to draw attention to the participants here that if we're going to take time and look at what Africa thought in its own agenda, Agenda 2063, talking about the Africa we want, there are some aspirations that have been drawn there. And on the first aspiration, there it says we want a prosperous Africa based on inclusive growth and sustainable development. And so when we look at this particular aspiration talks about sustainable development, and under there you will see a goal that talks about we want to have a blue economy for accelerated economic growth. And when we're going to talk about the blue economy, we certainly talk about the resources that we have in our particular oceans. And when we think of what we have in the ocean, the first thing we think about is the coral reefs. And the coral reefs we have, especially in places like Seychelles, these are famous places for tourism, but not only for tourism. Coral reefs have an ecosystem role that they play. And what is this? These coral reefs are not only for aesthetic value that tourists come and see and locals come and see, but coral reefs play an important role in that they provide shelter and also spawning grounds for much of the ocean life that we see. And without coral reefs, certainly this life becomes endangered, and certainly some of it can go into extinction. That's how important coral reefs are. And we must think about them, and we must think of protecting them. But coral reefs don't only provide this aesthetic value, they do not only provide this ecosystem role of providing shelter and spawning grounds for ocean life, but also they go further, they give protection to the shorelines from strong ocean currents and high tides. And this is why the coral reefs are generally referred to as barrier reefs, because they act as shock absorbers of these waves that come from the strong ocean currents and protect our shores. As a people that live on the island and in the beautiful islands of Seychelles, the beautiful beaches we see, most of it are protected because of the coral reefs that are there. And this is the reason why we need to protect our environment, and that is why United Nations Environment Program annually organizes events around the 5th of June, and it's called the World Environment Day. And the theme for this year was and is time for nature. Let us think about nature, its important roles, and the roles it plays in our lives. Without protecting this nature, we would not survive. But nature would survive without the human being. But we must think about it. As we talk about sustainable development, we are not only talking about development that destroys the environment, because this will be useless, but we want to talk about development that takes care of the environment. If we take care of the environment, we take care of nature, then the environment will also take care of us. And that is the reason why at this juncture, in this particular webinar, we want to recognize the work that is done by many organizations, such as CIF. There in the Seychelles, we were thinking of organizations such as the Seychelles National Park Authority, organizations like TRUST, and many other NGOs that are into environmental protection, environmental education. We salute them, and they do such great work, and we want to hear much more in this particular webinar that we're going to have. And I also want at this time to say thank you for again to the National Museum of Seychelles for bringing together all these organizations, both government and non-governmental organizations that are into nature protection, to this particular webinar, creating this particular platform. And coming from ICOM, as you have already heard, under ICOM, we created a working group on sustainability in 2018, because we recognize as museums that we cannot stay behind, but also join this conversation for sustainability, of which we know from a long time that this aspect of sustainability started being talked about as far back as 1987 in the Brundtland report, talking about our common future. And already at that time, it was already recognized by scientists that it was important for us, as we talk about development, let us think of sustainable development. And so in this way, the museums, as they have started working and thinking about the environment, they're talking about sustainability. In the end, with works such as this and this particular webinar we are attending, that is going to go to appeal to the people, to the public, to think about the importance of our environment. In this way, museums also are contributing in a small way to the sustainable development goals that we all want to achieve. Therefore, museums are doing this in several ways. And one of the many drivers of doing it is through museum education programs, which museums have been doing all over the world. And I'm pretty sure museums also in the Seychelles are doing, and because they are very active, we have this particular webinar and they've been pushing this particular aspect. And so through museum education programs, people are enlightened. School children know the importance of the environment and the importance of us protecting the environment, the importance of us reducing pollution in the environment so that the ecosystem can be stable and that we can have all the ecosystem services that we need from them. Lastly, I want to say, when we do all this as all parts and groups that are dealing with environment, we must learn to work together. To no one group can achieve everything to make this particular work done and make everyone to look at the environment and to make it uh, properly protected, but we need an integrated effort and we must join hands, join forces to work together. And this is what we are doing. And this is what ICOM Seychelles and the National Museums are doing. And I want to say thank you to them. And I know that once we will join forces, we work together, then we can win in this fight of protecting our environment. I want to say thank you to all of us that are here on the webinar, and I wish you well, and I want to learn more from this particular webinar. Thank you.
So welcome Dr. Henriette to do her presentation. Thank
the
you.
replanting that we do on the mountains, whereby these areas are heavily degraded, and it's difficult to walk in those areas because it's out in the open, in the hot sun, and most of these are far from the road. So we basically need to walk up carrying the plants very often for 20 to 30 minutes walk. So on top of walking in areas that are heavily degraded, open and barren, we also do some invasive alien species management, because in some of those areas, there are invasive species that have recolonized after the fire. So we do control those species and replant them with native trees. So as part of our replanting programs, we've replanted over 50 hectares of area in degraded forest with over 50,000 native plants. And we've done that with the assistance of hundreds of volunteers from the government, NGOs, tourism establishments, schools, and also the private landowners. We've also done replanting in mangroves and wetlands, whereby we planted over 30,000 different mangrove and non-mangrove plants. And again, we've done that with the assistance of communities who assist us in transporting the plants and planting, but also in terms of collecting the polypods after we've been planting. We've also put protection around the seedlings, because we noticed that the crabs were eating some of our plants, so we had to protect them. This slide here shows the before and after planting. This was only 8 months after planting. And the monitoring that we did showed us that we were having a plant survival rate of over 50%. And in this site specifically, we had a survival rate of 90%. So most of our plants were surviving. And we were seeing some differences to the habitat quite quickly, quite fast. This is another area that shows the before and after planting. It's an area whereby we planted mainly mangrove species, 3 different mangrove species. We introduced we introduced 2 different species in that area that were not found before. And we noticed through our monitoring that some of those mangroves were fruiting only 3 years after planting. As part of our programs, we also do trials and experiments because we need information to feed into our rehabilitation programs. We need to know which native plants are suitable to be planted in those harsh, barren areas. And we also need to know which technique to adopt as part of the rehabilitation program. So over the past 9 years, we've been doing trials, and we continue to do those trials. And we have found that there are certain species that adapt very well to these areas, and these are the ones that we select for further widespread replanting on praline. And we've also noticed that adding charcoal and organic matter to this otherwise infertile soil helps in increasing the growth, but also the survival rate of those plants. In addition, we've been doing mulching with dead leaves, especially palm leaves, but also using stones because there are a lot of stones on the ground. And we put these around the plant, and it creates a microclimate, which makes it more suitable for the plants to grow. So all of this information we feed into our replanting program. We also do education and awareness programs. We do several activities as part of all of our projects. We've produced posters that we exhibit in workshops, meetings, and also national exhibitions. We do hands-on activities with the kids and local communities. For instance, we have a program called Being a Biologist for a Day, whereby they go into the rivers and they explore what lives in a river, and they understand the importance of rivers. We do hikes in the forest as well, so that the people can discover the forest of praline and compare that with other degraded sites. We've done workshops and meetings whereby we invite local communities to contribute to our programs, to give their ideas as well and what we can do better. And we use our Facebook a lot for us to post our activities and to welcome feedbacks from the public on the various activities that we do. So that's it from me in terms of what praline is doing, in terms of what Trust is doing on praline in order to rehabilitate the degraded forest. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Alvina. Now it's Ms. Ravinia for your presentation.
Once again, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Isabelle Ravinia, and I work at the Seychelles National Park Authority. And I'm going to talk about what the Seychelles National Park Authority, SNPA, is doing to protect Seychelles biodiversity so that we can all benefit. So in this presentation, I'm going to introduce you to the Seychelles National Park Authority. I'm going to talk about the national parks managed by SNPA. I'm going to talk about our research and monitoring programs, our operations. Last but not least, I'm going to discuss our challenges. Basically, SNPA is responsible for the management of 7 national parks and 1 special reserve in Seychelles. Here you can see a map of our protected areas. Later on, I'll go into more details about the national parks and reserve. The vision of SNPA. The vision of SNPA is to protect and manage designated marine and terrestrial protected areas, including forested areas, for the future generation, with intention to use them for conservation, research, and educational purposes. Our mission is to become an international model for the sustainable management the national park system and sustainable forest areas by conserving biodiversity in designated protected areas with exemplary professionalism, innovation, and efficiency. The Seychelles National Park Authority has been mandated under the law to protect and to effectively manage the ecosystems and biodiversity in designated protected areas, PA, which fall under its jurisdiction. SNPA has to implement national conservation policies and obligations under multilateral agreement. has to provide tourism and recreation activities for visitors. It also has to facilitate and conduct research related to biodiversity and protected areas. SNPA has to promote education and awareness activities, has to implement sustainable forestry practices, and last but not least, it has to protect habitats and ecosystem from anthropogenic threats such as forest fire, pollution, and coral destruction. So here you can see how the governing structure of SNPA. SNPA is headed by a CEO, Chief Executive Officer, and the CEO receives strategic guidance from a board of directors. And it's important to note that the authority falls under the portfolio of the Minister for Environment, Energy, and Climate Change. It's also the minister who appoints the SNPA board. Here you can see how SNPA is organized. We have the Chief Executive Officer at the helm. We have the 5 different sections: Marine Operations Section, National Parks and Forestry Section, Administration and Human Resources, Research Section, and we also have a Finance Section. Under the Marine Operation, we have the different marine national parks that we manage. Under the National Parks and Forestry Section, you have the different subunits spread all over the country. I will now provide you with a brief history of SNPA. National parks have existed in the Seychelles for over 40 years, and SNPA is only 10 years old. So in the past, the management of national parks was under the mandate of the conservation section of the Ministry of Environment. In 1993, the Marine Parks Authority was created to manage the marine national parks only. In 2003, the Seychelles Center for Marine Research and Technology merged with the Marine Parks Authority to create the SMRT NPA. And finally, in 2009, the government of Seychelles created the Seychelles National Park Authority. This happened when the SCMRT NPA merged together with the forestry section in the National Parks unit from the Ministry of Environment. So that's it in a nutshell, the history of SNPA. I will now talk about SNPA's protected areas. Like previously mentioned, we manage 5 marine national parks, 2 terrestrial national parks, and 1 special reserve. It's important to know that SNPA has legal protective status under the National Parks and Nature Conservancy Act. So here is a map of all the national parks managed by SNPA and also the reserve. So on Mahe, we have, or near Mahe Island, we have Colony Marine National Park, Bétheny Marine National Park, and Saint-Anne Marine National Park. Then on Mahe Island, we have the Mont Seychellois National Park. On Pralé, we have the Pralé National Park, and next to it, we have the Kyries and Saint-Pierre Marine National Park. On La Digue, we have the Veve Special Reserve, and next to La Digue, we have the Ile Coco Marine National Park. I will now go over the individual parks managed by SNPA. The first one is Colony Marine Park. Colony Marine Park is 1.58 kilometers square. It was designated in 1979, and it is famous for its whale shark sighting, largest fish in the world, and it has one of the most popular beach on Mahe. Bétheny Marine Park. Bétheny is located quite close to Colony, It is quite small, 0.8 kilometers square, designated in the same year as Polone. It is rich in marine life. There is a combination of coastal habitats in the park. Bitene is idyllic for swimming, snorkeling, and diving. And it is quite close to the most popular tourist area on Mahe. It's quite close to Movalo. Important to note that access to the marine park is mostly by sea. St. Anne Marine Park now. St. Anne Marine Park is 14.23 kilometers square. It was designated in 1973, and this makes it the oldest marine protected area in the Western Indian Ocean. It is not far from the capital of Seychelles, 25 kilometers from the capital. It is rich in history. The first settlers settled in the marine park in 1770 on Staten Island. The marine park has one of the largest area of seagrass meadows in the Granitic Islands, and it is also, the marine park contains important sea turtle nesting sites. Curious Marine Park. Curious Marine Park is actually the sea around this huge island called Curious Island. The marine park itself is 14.7 kilometers square, but the island is the 5th largest granitic island in the Seychelles. The island was used as a former leper colony. There is a large population of coucou de mer found on the island. There's giant tortoises, free-ranging giant tortoises. The marine park also contains important sea turtle nesting sites. It has mangrove and seagrass. There is also an important population of lemon sharks. And the marine park was established in 1979. Il Coco Marine Park. Il Coco Marine Park is quite small, 0.01 kilometers square. It was established quite recently, 1996. It's found close to Ladik, 27 kilometers away from Ladik. And it is very popular with tourists comes for the excursion. The island of Coco is frequented by numerous marine birds such as shearwater, fairy turtle, and brown noddy. That's it for the marine national parks. I'm quickly going to touch on the terrestrial parks. We have the Mont Seychelles National Park, which is found on the island of Mahe. It basically covers around 1/3 of the main island. It was designated in 1979, and it has an area of 30.45 kilometers square. Praslin National Park is found on the island of Praslin. It was established in the same year as the Mont Seychelles National Park. And last but not least, we'll take the Verve Reserve. Verve Reserve is located on the island of Ladik, and it was created solely to provide a breeding and feeding habitat for the rare endemic bird, the Seychelles black paradise flycatcher. So that's it for our protected areas. Now I'm going to talk about our research and monitoring programs. At SNPA, we do coral reef monitoring. We have one of the longest running coral reef monitoring program in Seychelles. We do sea turtle monitoring. We control invasive species, such as invasive creepers on land and the coral-eating crown of thorn starfish. We monitor beaches within the marine park. We do beach profiling. We monitor mangroves. We restore habitats, both on land and in the sea. We do coral restoration. We also restore damaged habitats on land. We also do environment impact assessment, EIAs. We develop policy and legislations. We develop research projects. Last but not least, we do education and awareness raising activities. SNPA's operations. Firstly, I will talk about marine operations, what our marine team does. Our marine park rangers or officers need to monitor activities taking place in the park, the marine park, making sure that people are abiding to park regulations. They are not fishing because our marine parks are no-take zones. No fishing is allowed. Yeah. Park rangers, they also need to collect park fees on a daily basis because this is an important source of revenue for us. They also install mooring and demarcation buoys. Mooring buoys, very important for boats to not drop anchor. Demarcation buoys to show park boundaries. Our team will also assist if there is an oil spill in the area or even in the marine park. They are very active in search and rescue operation. National Park and Forestry operation. The National Park and Forestry section, they also monitor activities taking place in the parks on land to make sure that people are not harvesting plants or trees, for example. They maintain nature trails, which are big attractions here in Seychelles. They control invasive plants. They respond in the instance there is forest fire. We also sell timber and forest products. We sell coco de mer, for example, the largest nut in the world. That's an important forest product for us. The National Park and Forestry section also conducts search and rescue. They maintain timber plantation and they also maintain the plant nursery, which is very important to restore timber plantation. Lastly, I'm going to talk about the challenges faced by the authority. Poaching is one of our main challenge. Fishermen, for example, know that they're not supposed to fish in the marine park, still they do. So we have to be on the constant lookout for poachers. They don't just poach, they just don't come and fish illegally. They also poach sea turtles. So it's important for us to be on regular patrols. Infrastructure and facilities, that's another challenge. We do not necessarily have a physical presence in all our marine parks because we don't have the building there. We need boats to patrol the park, and it is quite costly to maintain a fleet of boats. Demarcation of park boundaries is not necessarily easy. It's quite easy for a demarcation buoy to break loose in rough seas. Coastal development and development pressure. There is substantial coastal development taking place in the country, and there is also coastal development taking place within the boundaries of the marine parks. There's also development pressure on land, quite close to the national parks. Climate change. This is a challenge not just for SNPA, but also for Seychelles. Seychelles is a small developing state, and we are prone to the impacts of climate change. Lately, we've noticed a lot of coastal erosion due to sea level rise. Beaching events are becoming more frequent, and the marine parks are not protected. We've had quite a few bleaching events over the past few years. Damage of natural ecosystem by visitors. Even though we welcome visitors, we need them to generate revenue. They come with consequences. Snorkelers and divers, for example, they accidentally damage corals. Okay, pollution. especially littering is a big problem, especially on the nature trails. So that's it for our challenges. And that's my last slide. Thank you for your attention. I will take your questions if you have any.
Thank you very much, Madam Isabel, for your lovely presentation. And I just wanted to find out within your systems what you are doing to help inform the public on some of the challenges that you have, such as the damage of the natural ecosystem by visitors. What are you doing about that? Do you have some form of educational programs within yourselves, or do you work with other state institutions to inform the public the importance of keeping our ecosystem clean, for lack of a better term, so to avoid damage through other than just damage by people visiting and also pollution?
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Nyambe, for your question. It is important to note that education and awareness is one of our mandate, and we have we're very active. We have a Facebook page. We work closely with the media here to raise awareness about issues such as littering. We give talks in schools to kids to talk to them about the impacts of pollution on the environment. So yes, we do have a program in place, even though I've not gone into details about it. And the good thing is, here in Seychelles, the media is very supportive. As soon as you go to them, they're ready to report on such incidents.
Merci beaucoup.
Sanyam, I've answered your question.
Merci, merci.
Merci.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hi.
Hi.
In terms of how we raised awareness, this was a big objective for us. We really tried over the 8 months and even past those 8 months to get the word out about the Algebra Cleanup Project and the work that we were doing. So nationally, we appeared on the Seychelles Broadcasting Corporation many times, as well as Télé Seychelles. Our biggest coverage was probably from Sky News. And myself and another volunteer, Kelsey Bell, you might be able to see the photo right in the middle. We were fortunate enough to appear live on Sky News from Algebra. And actually our coverage on Sky News had a reach of 122 million homes in 127 countries. We also produced a couple of live broadcasts as well through Sky News. There were plenty of short clips provided, so we really did get a lot of coverage. There was also a documentary which you can watch on YouTube called 50,000 Flip-Flops in Paradise, which featured the Algebra Cleanup Project in more detail. We featured on local radio, national newspapers, regional and national magazines as well. We had photos of marine debris collected on Algebra at the G7 summit in Canada, which President Faure attended. And some of our social media posts have reached a large range of people, as well as other activities that we've done as well. One of the links that we managed to develop with the Seychelles Natural History Museum was actually organizing a night at the museum where we invited local kids in particular to come along and learn more about the issues of plastic pollution. So we've really tried a range of online and offline tactics for our educational outreach. So why is this so important? For the Algebra Cleanup Project to have a meaningful impact, we felt that it has to be part of the solution that tackles the issue at its source, which is plastic consumption and littering. So for us, cleaning Algebra is a big part of the expedition, yes, but we really want to try and raise awareness on how we use plastics, how much of it we use, single-use items in particular. This is where you will see the change in trying to instill that behavior change. So through our campaign, through the 8 months leading up to the Algebra Cleanup Project, this was our main focus. And we had activities both in the Seychelles as well as in the United Kingdom. So we have our team in the UK as well, our Oxford volunteers. We really tried to ramp up our educational outreach activities. So what did the expedition itself actually look like? So we had a team of 12 and we were based for 5 weeks on Aldabra. And for the majority of the time, we were based on 3 remote field camps. I should point out these field camps had no electricity, no running water, incredibly limited communication with the outside world. The aim, which looking back was very ambitious, was to try to remove 50 metric tons of plastics pollution from Aldabra. What I should say is that this really does take a lot of planning. So even leading up to the expedition, there were huts that needed fixing and adding to, basic rations and drops. So when you're on camp, you have to eat. All of these things were delivered to camps as well. You have to bear in mind with Aldabra, there's no infrastructure in terms of cars, in terms of moving from place to place. You get boats either through the lagoon, depending on the tide, or via the ocean. So you're really at the mercy of elements, and trying to navigate that when you've got a huge logistical project is a really big undertaking. I should emphasize also the Coast Guard's role in delivering this expedition. We had to bring them on board because as much as 12 volunteers could do, physically trying to remove that much plastics off an island onto small boats, as you can see from some of the photos, onto a larger boat, we need the help of support of the Coast Guard, and they were really integral in the work that we tried to do. As you can see from the slides, the expedition itself was split into 2 phases. So we had phase 1, which was just our aim to try and collect as much marine debris as possible along the coast. Phase 2 was then actually moving this marine debris from our collection point to another point to make it easier to move onto the boat. And then the final part was actually trying to get this marine debris off the island itself to bring it back to Mahe. So as I'm sure you can imagine, a very, very huge undertaking. If you look at this particular map of Aldabra, you'll see that there are 2 red lines. The straight red line, you'll see there are numbers, 23 all the way through to 36. These are essentially where we focused our beach cleaning efforts. If you look at where number 47 and 55 are on the top left of Aldabra, you'll see there's a little island. That is where the research station, or that's roughly where the research station is based. So in order to get to where the red line is, you have to take a boat round via the ocean. And that in itself was, depending on the weather, up to 30 minutes, if not slightly longer. So then you get dropped where the red line is. You have to make your way from the beach to your hut. And the various points that you see are the different beaches that we had to clean on a daily basis. So one day we would take 23, another day you take 24, for example. And we had 2 teams along this stretch. So where the yellow dots are was one team, and that's where I was based with my team. And the blue dots, 29 to 36, was where the second team was based. If you look at the right, you'll see there's another red line, 37, 38, and 39. My team also went to that particular corner of Aldabra. It's known as Senkas, and we did some cleaning there as well. But as I'm hoping that you get a sense of, the size, the extreme terrain of Aldabra, the climate, the tides, the remoteness, all of these presented several serious logistical challenges when we were undertaking this, as well as general health and safety hazards. And the scale of the operation was absolutely huge. We've only tackled parts of these red lines, but as you can see, there's the rest of Aldabra, which wasn't ever targeted through this particular project, but it just shows you how big and how much resource has to go into cleaning up an island like Aldabra. In terms of the marine litter composition, the top line, the cleanup composition, shows you what we actually managed to pick up during our time on the expedition. So 61% of what we managed to clear was fishing gear. Now, if you look at what we estimate to be left on Aldabra, we think there's up to 83% worth that is fishing gear alone. And actually a lot of the fishing gear is within Seychelles waters. So much of the plastics in the marine debris, like bottles, like flip-flops, that often comes from other countries. And I'll talk a bit more about that shortly. But the fishing gear itself actually comes from Seychelles waters. So things like fads, fishing net, rope, they're often discarded into the ocean. And because of the currents, they eventually find their way onto remote islands like Aldabra. So this slide just shows you where most of what we found comes from. And a lot of it comes from Southeast Asia and the East African coastline. So like I said much earlier on, because a lot of these countries may not necessarily have the most developed, or in some cases, any waste management, these things often find their way into the waters. And because of the currents, they will then find their way onto remote islands like Aldabra. So part of the solution is thinking about how we can support some of these countries who don't have as extensive a waste management system to actually improve in this area, because it's countries like Seychelles that then foot the ecological and the financial bill for all of this marine debris. One of the outcomes was to try and reprocess the collected marine debris that we gathered on Aldabra. This is still ongoing and it's incredibly ambitious. In the end, we came back with 25.75 tons of marine debris. So as much as we're trying to reprocess the collected marine debris, and there is a lot that we've done, a lot of other organizations, including the likes of SNPA, Marine Conservation Society Seychelles, they have been able to come to us and reprocess a lot of the stuff and repurpose things. But there is still a lot of stuff that needs doing. And it's not enough just to move the problem elsewhere. We've highlighted the nature of the problem, but there's still a lot of work that needs doing. These are some of the impacts that we've noticed as a result of the Aldabra cleanup project. So I've already mentioned 20.75 metric tons was removed. We have 10 new Aldabra ambassadors, including myself. So had I not done the Aldabra cleanup project, I wouldn't be here presenting to you today. We've got a baseline now for future research and composition. And one of the big things that the campaign, as well as SIF, is trying to do is push for wider policy impacts, both in Seychelles and globally. We have a better understanding now of the nature of the problem, so hopefully this can lead to solutions. I'm delighted to share that the SIF Board of Trustees have agreed to a second ACUP, so it will be happening. As part of that, there has been other bodies of work that have been produced. So there's an executive summary of the project. There's a manuscript which outlines the research study in more detail, penned by April Burt. But in terms of ACUP 2, there are challenges to it. I've spoken about the logistical challenges. I've spoken about funding. These are all challenges to organizing an expedition like this. Another problem is COVID-19. We just don't know the full extent of the impact that COVID-19 will have on a project like the Aldabra Cleanup Project to run again. Already COVID-19, from what I understand, has had a significant impact on SIF's operations, on their operations on Aldabra. So getting people to Aldabra is a huge challenge because there are no flights at the moment. There's a lack of resources, lack of staffing. So all of these things contribute towards the wider problem. So, you know, we're still kind of observing in many ways, or SIF is, in terms of next steps. And one of the biggest things that SIF are keen to look at is getting more people to apply to this expedition. As a Seychellois, it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to go to Aldabra. Only 20 people actually applied for the Aldabra Cleanup Project. So I had a 1 in 3 chance of going to Aldabra. Those are amazing odds. So what we really need moving forward is more people from diverse backgrounds applying for these sorts of initiatives. So that's the end of my presentation. As I say, I'm just a volunteer who took part in this program. I'm not an SIF staff member. So if anybody has any further questions about the Aldabra Cleanup Project, please feel free to contact the details on this particular slide. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and answer any questions that anyone may have to share. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Greg. Anybody who has any question, please ask Greg. And this is a lifetime opportunity. If you want to apply for the cleanup on Aldabra, you can do so. Yes, with Greg, and he'll tell you where you have to go.
I have a question.
Okay, Mr. Nyambe.
Greg, thank you very much for your lovely presentation. I must say to you, I'm quite impressed with what you are doing in terms of cleaning up the environment of plastic, which is certainly a very big problem for the world at the moment, and it is also very dangerous for marine life. And the world has not done so well in terms of cleaning up of plastics away from our oceans and rivers and lakes, especially. I did note from your presentation that your greatest bulk of plastic collection is connected to fishing gear. And that says quite a lot about activities that are happening. It certainly implies also that there is a lot that our colleagues or the communities that are doing fishing activities may not be doing very well also for our environment. Either they're being left in the sea or they are being left on the banks and they are getting washed away into the sea. I was just wondering that amongst your education programs, if you have any plans, or probably you have already done some programs with the fishing communities in Seychelles, just to let them know what these aspects are and what you have found there, so that they can appreciate the magnitude, first of all, of what you are finding as debris. Secondly, say to them what this particular act is going to do on the community fishing, the fish itself, and all the associated animals that they go fishing on the sea, because it may be, well, a fact that people will think, let's just throw the gear by the banks and the rest will sort itself. But such acts, they should understand in their minds that it also comes back to them. Eventually, they will start complaining the catch is becoming lower, or the sizes of the catch are becoming smaller, but without not knowing the web and the connection and the ripple effects of the acts that they are doing. And I must also, whilst before you can answer that, and I must still commend you for the many programs you are doing, especially with children, because they are the future champions of the environment going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your question, Mr. Nyambe. So I should point out that the Aldaba Cleanup Project is one of multiple efforts I feel that Seychelles, particularly the civil society space, has been undertaking to address the issue of marine debris and plastics pollution. There are fantastic initiatives such as the Ocean Project Seychelles. I know a lot of conservation NGOs who do beach cleanups on a regular basis. So it's one of many efforts that is taking place. It's probably just one of the more high profile ones in the past year in particular, but I wanted to acknowledge the others. I think in terms of specific work with the fishermen, I think that's a fantastic point. In the 8 months that we had, it's not an area that we perhaps gave enough attention to, and I think moving forward, it's definitely something that should be factored into future outreach programs. I think there are natural challenges with it because a lot of the, I would say, the large focus of fishermen isn't necessarily to think about the environmental impacts that they're leaving, although that is what we're trying to push towards. It's about trying to catch as much fish as possible. So even though that does have an unintended impact, we haven't necessarily taken the time to sit down, have those conversations. And even if we try to, knowing sometimes how the fishing community can be, I can't guarantee that we would have the kind of level of receptiveness as we would like. It's also worth pointing out that it's not necessarily just Seychellois fishermen. We have a lot of fishermen from, and a lot of fishing fleets from different corners of the world who come into our waters. And actually the ones that make it as far afield or close to Aldabra are often from other countries or neighboring countries. So even whilst we were on Aldabra undertaking this expedition, there was actually a Comorian fishing vessel that was seized because they were fishing illegally within Seychelles waters. So, you know, how do you do outreach with countries of that magnitude, for example? And I think one of the challenges also, as I mentioned at the very beginning, is how exactly a country like Seychelles manages its waters. We have a population of less than 100,000 people. Our exclusive economic zone is over 1.4 million square kilometers, and most of that is ocean. So that naturally presents challenges in terms of how we police our waters. But I definitely think more could be done in terms of educating fishermen, introducing the necessary legislation. So there have been conversations in our National Assembly about the use of fishing aggregation devices, for example, FADs, looking at upgradable options. So I think that is the next step. But a small country like Seychelles will always need the support of its neighbors to help with the outreach and in policing that.
Thank you, Greg. Any more questions?
Hi, thank you for that presentation. I hope I was really fascinating, and it's amazing to see also how many funds were raised from private sector. It's really a model that can also inspire others. Definitely, I think more can be done from the tourists who are visiting in financially contributing to the impact that their visits are having. But I'm just wondering, I hope I didn't overlook it. I was getting interrupted a little bit during your presentation, so I hope I didn't miss it. But how are you working with the museum? And I know the museum has a strong outreach program, but can you, if you already featured it, can you just reiterate, just see how you're working with the museum to link with the public on your actions? Thank you.
Yes, of course. Thank you for your question. So we've worked closely with the museum on one event in particular. I believe it was towards the end of 2018, possibly early 2019. We organized an event called A Night at the Museum. If I'm not mistaken, I think we had around 20 to 30 young people, predominantly from the Scouts, and working alongside the museum. We organized this, I think it was a 3-hour evening event where we showed a documentary around plastics pollution. We actually brought some of the marine debris that previous groups from Aldabra had brought along as well. And we tried to do some general awareness raising on plastics pollution. So as much as the online awareness raising has been positive, I think you have a real impact when you can do the community-based face-to-face work. And I have to say, having the support of the Natural History Museum in particular for that was incredibly beneficial. And obviously, being invited onto this particular webinar as well, I think had we not done that with the National History Museum, we wouldn't be here on this call. So we're very thankful to Seychelles National Museums for their support. And I hope moving forward, whenever the next ACUP happens, we can continue to rely on their support.
I did hear you say the night at the museum. Thank you for recalling that. I'm just wondering, you have such rich photos in your presentation. I'm wondering if you've done a kind of online exhibition of that. And there's one photo in one of your last slides with all of the bags piled up and the volunteers on top. That's the plastic that was collected through the volunteer initiative this past year? Or what time period was that collected?
Yes, that's correct. So the photo of the boat with all of the big gunny sacks, that was taken in, it would have been the end of March or April 2019. So that's when the vessel came back from Aldabra. And we had the vast majority of the team on hand on Mahe to meet our our conquest, I suppose. So yeah, we do have some great photos. In terms of your point about an online exhibition, that's a fantastic idea, and I think that's something that we can explore more of moving forward. What I would say is that we've tried to be very proactive, certainly on social media. So the Outer Book Cleanup Project has a presence on Instagram, it has a presence on Facebook, there's a Twitter account as well. Now that the project isn't necessarily live until the next iteration of it happens, a lot of that has been absorbed by the Seychelles Island Foundation's main account. So it's still there, it's still being looked at, it's still being managed, but the frequency of posts isn't as regular. But certainly in the build up to the expedition itself, we were doing a lot of outreach online, a lot of photos, a lot of images were out there. I think I mentioned that we have a documentary that Sky News produced for us as well. That's on YouTube. And that's called 50,000 Flip-Flops in Paradise. A bit of a tongue twister. I can type it out in the chat afterwards.
Yeah.
And there was also a 50-minute documentary that was produced on the Outer Brook Cleanup Project, which was showed to a local audience here in Seychelles on our national television stations. And it's also been used as educational outreach, both here and abroad. So I was in Switzerland earlier this year before all the travel plans stopped, and I used that particular documentary as one of our outreach tools. So I really like the idea of photo exhibition, but I just wanted to convey what we have done so far.
That is really, I don't know if I'm muted still, but that's really a lot of available information that I think can be, better used. One area that I think sometimes we forget about is the airport arrival. And, people are waiting in long lines, and there's possibility to link with the airport authorities and see if you can't have some kind of exhibition to sensitize people on their arrival. And if you're not able to get them on their arrival, we have 2 hours, 3 hours early to the airport waiting for your flight to depart. And that's another opportunity if you can get a space on pillars on a wall somewhere where some of this efforts could be featured. I think that could be powerful. And then, as this is a World Heritage Site, you have the annual meetings of the World Heritage Committee, which have people from all over the world, decision makers, donors, partners. And that's another opportunity where people are allowed to propose exhibitions or information sessions and other things where you can raise awareness of how you've done this, especially as it's such a hard to reach area. I think you've gone to incredible lengths to have the impact. So it'd be interesting to see how to multiply the effects. And as I said in the opening remarks, we really need to see this wider network that we can get involved. And it's good that you already have the Sky News documentary. If you put the link, I think it'd be really interesting. But it's great if we can get more, media attention to this and sharing. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much. And I'll be sure to feed forward your ideas to the SIF staff too. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Greg. I have been notified that Mr. Nyambe has another meeting. So if he has any final words to say, the mic is yours, Mr. Nyambe.
Thank you very much. It has been very great for me to participate in this very nice webinar. I am learning quite a lot of what is happening. And before I can even quickly continue to say my other remarks, I just wanted to add to what our friend Caroline has said. When you think about doing exhibitions at the airport, one of the challenges you mentioned is still fundraising much more to do many more works. You could put at the end of a particular exhibition and a perspex box, an open box for those that have changed and are leaving Seychelles and want to leave something for nature to deposit in there. And so it's a great way also for you to do fundraising break for the organization. I would like to lastly say, I know that in Seychelles you're doing a great job regarding the environment. I would like to encourage all of you to continue doing what you are doing for nature. Whatever you do in a small way to protect nature in Seychelles, you are doing it for the planet. So please know that your little efforts that you are doing are very much appreciated, and that you are doing it not only for the people of Seychelles, but for nature. And as I said at the beginning, and my colleague Kara also mentioned this, to protect our environment, we all need an integrated approach. Let us continue as organizations to create linkages, and such a platform as we have had also helps to strengthen our linkages, to strengthen our efforts to protect the environment. And the more we continue to interact, that which we thought was a challenge within our organization, you will find other colleagues have a solution for it, and then we can continue like this to protect our environment. I wish you well, and stay blessed, and stay away from COVID-19. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nambier. Now I will ask Nicole to proceed with her presentation.
So good afternoon once again. My name is Nicole Bao, and I'm from the Seychelles Natural History Museum, and I'm the museum educator at the museum. So my presentation will be based about the environment activities done by the museum club at the museum. So the aim of the museum club program are to sensitize and foster our participants on appreciation and respect for their historical and cultural heritage. This is to stimulate public awareness, enable them to learn more about the roles of the museum, and also to empower our participants to take positive action to conserve and preserve their heritage. So actually the museum club was relaunched in 2015 after some years that it was not that active. So when we relaunched in 2015, we have about 10 participants. So when we launched, we called them the small ambassadors of the museum. So over the years, the group have increased, and now we have more than 50 members that form part of the museum club. And they are children that come from different schools on the island, be it government school and private school. They all come together, we work, we play together, and they learn together. So one of our activities that we have done, actually, we don't work alone, we work with other partners in the community. So that's an activity that we have done in close collaboration with Trust on Pralen. This was in preparation for them to prepare the plan to plant in eroded areas on the island. And this is an activity that we move from the main island, we travel with them, we go to the other island to enable this program to take place. So we also work with the Sea Turtle Friends of Seychelles. It is a small national NGOs that actually they are the one who work to stop people from killing the sea turtle. So the sea turtle actually, we have the green turtles that are classified as endangered, while the hawksbill are critically endangered. Despite the strict laws that we have, poaching of sea turtle is still a major concern because of the country tradition of eating sea turtle meat as a delicacy. So the museum club joined hands with other partners in an effort to protect these sea creatures. This is, we done this through a march in Victoria. We also did the beach survey at Ansoyal. So we also have the other side of paradise, like Greg was showing in his presentation. So we do the beach survey, so children can sort out the different kinds of rubbish that we have on the beach, and also to synthesize them on the importance of picking up their rubbish when they go to the beaches, and also the effect that this rubbish has on the marine species. Another educational trip is to the Seychelles Island, which is another granitic island of the Seychelles. This is for the children to know the ecological side of the island, learn more of the plant, the animal that live on this island. So we also have the opportunity to visit the Vallée de Mai, which is one of the World Heritage Sites. So it was an opportunity for them to learn of the ecological process of this unique forest. It is also an opportunity and a learning experience as they have direct contact with the natural world. So they have a chance to see the Vallée de Mai for themselves, learn of the 6 endemic palm that we have in the Seychelles. So also part of our activities, we do river activities where our participants can learn of the different species that lives in the river. They learn the importance of water, why we should conserve water, and why we should keep the river clean, and all the different species in the river. Non-governmental organization, NGO, and private sectors, company to change people's mindset and behavior towards the environment, keep on addressing our youth with the aim of raising the awareness of environmental issues and fostering their interest in environmental work. We have to continue to develop and engage in programs and activities to educate and nurture youth. After all, they are all the future stewards of our environment. Use the Natural History Museum as a platform in society to voice out different topics affecting the Seychelles biodiversity. So thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. Any question? So if you don't have any question, we'll proceed with the last 3 presentations from the 3 staff from the SIF, Aurélie, Constance, and Monica. You can proceed with your presentation.
So thank you very much for inviting us for the presentation. So I will be talking about the safeguarding of the Seychelles biodiversity and conservation work that we do here at Vallée de Mai and in the time of COVID. So as you know now, SIF manages the 2 World Site of Heritage, Vallée de Mai and Aldabra Atoll, but I will be focusing on the Vallée de Mai because I'm the scientific coordination of Vallée de Mai here. So the work is not done by itself, so I would like to introduce you to my amazing team. They are great workers here, and you can see there is a lot of people, but we are more usually like around 8 in the group most of the time. So a lot of movement happening, and as you can see, there is little different icon to the faces, to each faces. It's just like saying like some of the staff are more focused on specific project, and others are here to help throughout all the different projects that we have. So talking about projects, so we manage the fauna, flora, invasive alien species, and we also work on the awareness aspect of Vallée de Mai. For the fauna, we focus on the Black Parrot project, and for the invasive alien species, here we will focus about the yellow crazy ant, we also known as YCA. So however, my 2 other colleagues, Monica Griffith and Constance Trajet, will be talking about those species respectively. And I will be focusing on the flora and the awareness aspect of the project, of the work that we do here at Vallée de Mai. So concerning the flora, we work on the plant monitoring here, mainly on the phenology of the plants and also on the coco de mer regeneration. So first, I will talk about the phenology. So it is a study of the periodic plant cycle life event, and this is to see how the weather influences and on the variation of the flowering, fruiting, and aspect of the. And basically what we do is like we have a selection of plants that we monitored every twice a month. So on the 15th and the 30th of each month, we go and we monitor each species, and then we record whether they are flowering, fruiting, and etc. So why do we do that? Is because this helps us to predict the future timing on event, whether like it's gonna be flowering soon or if it's gonna be budding soon. And however, it can also be a good indicator of climate change, for example. So if there is like a season where we haven't had a good raining season, for example, then it can indicate us of the possible impact on the species, because as we know, a lot of species depend on the plant activity here. So they may depend on the plant for habitat or also for food resources. So one interesting link that we have found so far is like one of our native species, the black parrot, may be directly related to a type of plant here, endemic plant, the Latanier milpat. So maybe the species is dependent on the fruit for it to breed successfully. But my colleague here will be talking about it further. So the next step is to continue on the monitoring of the work we do, continuing to monitor and see any further progress, is to also write reports about the work that we do here so that we can use it to investigate on future management project regarding the plant itself, to see which species is actually requiring our attention. Maybe certain species has not been fruiting or flowering for several years. So by monitoring the phenology, we can see those indications. And to see which species are important for other species. So like I said, for the black parrot and the certain endemic plant species, it's also important to find what are the links. So the next plant aspect I will be talking about is the coco de mer. So why do we protect it? Because it is the endemic species of the Seychelles, and also it is the symbolic work of the plant of the Seychelles. So when everybody think about Seychelles, they think about Cocoa Fest. So this is really cool. So it is a good way to attract tourists to come and visit and look at the biggest nut in the world. And with tourists come money, and therefore funding for further conservation projects. So the aim of our work in regards to coco de mer is to protect at least 20% of the coco de mer that are falling off the ground. So we are currently monitoring 455 knots, and we work closely with the other staff of SIF, which are not from research team, but however, they help us to monitor and also to guard the coco de mer. So we have a custodian program where they come with us bi-monthly, and then twice a month, where we go and we monitor coco de mer in the field. So from some of our findings so far is like, we found out like for a nut to fall off the ground, and it takes like around 5 months for the nuts to remain as nuts. And then it takes average of 13 months for the nuts to actually germinate, which is quite long. And the germination stage is the most fragile stage of the plant actually growing. The next step is to continue monitoring, reporting on our findings so that to inform further conservation action, to ensure further protection, like I just said, sorry, and to know more about the seedlings development, to see how long it takes for the germination to continue and for the seedlings to become an adult. So we also work on the awareness aspect closely with the educational and outreach project officer here at Vallée de Mai, Miss Maria. So we do a lot of workshops So it can be internally. By internally, I mean within the staff of SIF themselves. So we recently did a workshop on the black parrot mist netting, where we taught the staff how we do mist netting and what are the procedures to do. And also we do external workshop, meaning like we share our knowledge with the tour guide, for example. So we did a workshop here where we show the tour guides the latest updates of our findings, so that they are always up to date into the information that they give to their client. So for the education aspect with regards to students, we also go into classes where we explain our work here with SIF and what we do at Vallée de Mai, and also we also participate in going into events that the educational officer of Vallée de Mai do. Regarding the social media, we do a lot of posts on Facebook, and these are the most recent ones, so you can go and check on it on the SIF website. So now what is happening is, like with the COVID-19, the Seychelles went into a lockdown, and as we all know, it affected a lot of our work. So the first impact that we had was like movement of staff. So we had to say goodbye to one of our important staff, Katie Collins. So she was here working on the phenology and the coco de mer, but with her going quickly, she didn't really have the time to write a handover. So, however, we're still working with her remotely, but it's always good to have like that time of handing over properly with the staff before they leave. So all of our monitoring had to stop because we were all in lockdown, so nobody were able to be in the road. So the YCA baiting event had to be cancelled once again because of the COVID-19. And for aspect of the awareness, we couldn't go and share our knowledge with the public or go according to the plan of the education and outreach officer, Miss Maria, where we were supposed to be going into school and sharing our knowledge. However, with the COVID-19, we had some good things happening. So we managed to tackle a lot of paperwork that otherwise would have been stacking and keep on piling up. So we worked on the management plan, reports, so many reports got done during that period of time, protocols, also cleaning and sorting data, so which has otherwise wouldn't have been done. So we also identified some of gap within our system. So with one of our key staff stuck in Mauritius during the COVID-19, so we found out like without her, the work would not be done properly here in the Seychelles. So this situation of COVID-19 helped us to really understand where are the gaps and also how to tackle them so that next time a COVID-19 happen again, we will be prepared. So for working within different departments, so this is simply like SIF, we have different departments. We have the research, we have sales, we have the visitor centers. So with the COVID-19, we all managed to come together and help each other. So for example, we've not a lot of tourists, so that the sales department could help research in our work and also for them to understand what we are doing in the forest and not just walking in the forest. And also this will help them also to deal with the clients and more selling the product even better by knowing what we are doing. So for creativity, with the educational outreach officer, during the lockdown, we managed to create a little educational booklet that it is still being reviewed right now, but this has given us the opportunity to launch it, to start doing it. And the same with making more videos for kids to see what we are doing here at Vallée de Mai. And again, in case of another lockdown happening, they will still be in touch with SIF. So we have been more in contact through social media, such as Facebook posts. We even did a live, Facebook Live, where people could not come to Vallée de Mai, but actually we brought Vallée de Mai to them through the live talk and live tour. And yes, it was really interesting. And it was the first time, so now we can launch it even more. We organized a lot of online events, and one was iNaturalist. It was a BioBlitz challenge where people were encouraged to identify endemic species in their garden and then send the picture over for us to see if like they know what they are looking for. And this went well as well. And this with the COVID-19, we have seen like we are more connected to the world through different online platforms and the webinar as well. So now we are facing the new normal, working with social distancing, and as you can see, we are all standing in maintaining our social distancing. So we are working with limited resources. It can be financial or also in terms of staff. So with no tourists coming, that means no income and therefore no money. So we are working on the reserve right now, and this we have to find out ways on how to use the resources that we actually have and make the best out of it. And we are playing a lot of catching up with the work that we have so far, because like 2 months of not working properly has given us a lot of work to do now that we are back into the new normal. Sorry. So, however, we managed to do one of our main targets of this year, which was to bait the Vallée de Mai and get rid of the YCA, the yellow crazy ant, that my friend will talk more about later. So thank you very much for your attention.
Right, so I'm Constance Tragitt, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the yellow crazy ant work, the baiting and the monitoring during a time of COVID-19. So, as my colleague touched on earlier, in the coconut forests in Vallée de Mai, but also in Font-Pépère, which is an area just south of Vallée de Mai, there are many keystone species which interact with each other, and these form healthy, well-functioning ecosystems and food chains. But if these species are predated on or in any way harassed, that could actually jeopardize these food chains and natural processes and threaten the health of the ecosystem. So that's what we're aiming to protect. The threat we're facing in Vallée de Mai after fire and poaching is yellow crazy ants. Yellow crazy ants were first introduced into Praslin in the early 60s. They are part of the top 10 worst invasive species in the world. They are actually classed in the 5 top 10 worst invasive ant species in the world. They can impact ecosystems and species, but also people and even agriculture. They live around human habitation and will nest readily in any object pretty much, which makes them a very successful tramp species. And this is why they've been introduced into many countries all around the world. They can take on animals much larger than themselves because they spray these animals with formic acid. The animals then can't see, and then they walk away, can't really escape from the ants, and the ants will then tear them to pieces, basically. Yellow crazy ants also form relationships with sap-sucking insects, which include aphids and scale insects. These plant pests will feed the yellow crazy ant sugar in the form of honeydew, and in return, the yellow crazy ants will provide the pests with protection from predation. So really, yellow crazy ants are a problem for both fauna and flora in Vallée de Mai. And unlike other ant species, the queens will quite happily live together and group together and group their armies of workers together, forming what are known as super colonies, which are massive nests. So that's what we're dealing with. And we first saw these in Vallée de Mai in 2010. Then for the next few years, the yellow crazy ants couldn't really decide whether they wanted to invade Vallée de Mai or not. But then in 2016, we saw something rather disturbing in that they had invaded more of Vallée de Mai than ever before. And the last 2 years were really, really quite alarming, where yellow crazy ants were found everywhere in Vallée de Mai. And this is when we applied for emergency funding from UNESCO that Kathleen talked about earlier. So how do we safeguard biodiversity in this case? What we're trying to do is control yellow crazy ants. And we're doing this with this charming product called Ant Off, which comes in the form of these little granules here. And these are mostly made up of fish meal with a little bit of what's known as fipronil, which is a neurotoxic pesticide, which is used for treating termites or even fleas on pets. It's designed to be very attractive to the yellow crazy ant. However, it does come with limitations in that we can't spread it anywhere where the ground is wet or if it rains. The reason being that the granules will dissolve and then the ants can't pick them up and take them to their nests. One granule through contact, but also through sharing with other ants, is estimated to kill 90 ants. So that's how that works. And how we use it is we walk along the forest up and down 10 meters apart from each other, and we cast the granules 5 meters either side of us. And you can see these are the tracks from the first 2 baitings where we covered all of Vallée de Mai. Unfortunately, this does leave gaps. This leaves gaps along the waterways, which could be used by the yellow crazy ants as a refuge. We approach these areas with a different bait called Thermidor, which is a liquid bait, which contains a small proportion of fipronil. And we deploy that in these rather alien-looking bait stations along the waterways. It's diluted to low concentrations. The bait stations are ant-specific, and yes, we deploy them along the waterways. Ooh, oh, something's freezing. Okay, sorry, my computer just froze there. Along the waterways, as you can see on this map, all the little red dots are bait stations. We deploy these at the same time as casting granule bait, and we leave the bait stations out for a few days. And at the end of 4 days, we go along all the bait stations again and collect the remaining liquid bait. That is to avoid exposing native invertebrates to the bait for too long, longer than necessary. We do monitoring to see what impact the bait and or the yellow crazy ants are having on native species, but also yellow crazy ants. We do that before and after the baiting, and we were monitoring in Vallée de Mai and Font-Pépère, which was the baited and unbaited area, respectively. But now we have sufficient information to move forward and bait both areas. So we bait multiple species, we monitor multiple species. But what I want to draw people's attention to is that we have 2 surveys aimed at ants. One is an activity card, which is a survey which is carried out all over the world for yellow crazy ants. And it's made up of putting a card down, putting a blob of jam on, and counting how many ants are present on the card after 1 hour. And eventually we'll be able to compare our results with other areas in the world. It also gives us a very quick image of what the yellow crazy ants are doing. The other method is to count how many ants are caught in a pitfall trap after 24 hours. And that gives us a very robust idea of what the yellow crazy ants are doing, but also what's happening to the other ant species in the area. What happens if we don't control yellow crazy ants? Well, unfortunately, yellow crazy ants have been recorded to have negative impacts on native species all around the world. And these pictures are from staff working in Vallée de Mai. So this is what we've been seeing. It's impossible to tell that whether yellow crazy ants have killed an animal or just scavenging on dead animals. However, we have seen dead animals being eaten and at least living animals being harassed. We have also observed a marked decrease in the white slug in Vallée de Mai, which is an endemic species, and it seems to be the most vulnerable to yellow crazy ant attacks. So this is what we're looking at if we don't act. So that sounds like a lot of work. How did it go during COVID-19? Well, I don't know about you guys, but I had a fantastic time during the lockdown because I got to catch up on a lot of paperwork, as Aurélie was mentioning. What wasn't so good is that we had to postpone our Seychelles surveys, Seychelles frog surveys. We also had to really push to get one of our surveys done before the lockdown. So that was a bit tricky, but it was all right. What was really unfortunate is the lockdown clashed with the baiting date. Yeah, there was nothing we could do about that. We also had to train more people as we had lost a few staff and some staff were stuck in other countries, and that was all a bit tricky, especially at a time when we could only train 3 people at once. On the day of the baiting, it's very labor intensive. We require a lot of manpower, and buses weren't ferrying as many people as normal. So we actually had to go and collect people early in the morning to get them to Vallée de Mai on time. Trickier than it sounds. We also had to adhere to social distancing during the baiting. That wasn't so much of an issue once we were out in the field baiting, as we were 10 meters apart, but still something we had to think of. And we were less visible because there were little to no tourists in the Vallée de Mai at the time. But we did it anyway. So this is on day 2 of the baiting, just before we head out to bait Vallée de Mai. And this is what we achieved. So for the first time, we baited not only the whole of Vallée de Mai, but a small section of Fond Pépère. These lines represent the tracks of the baiters with the 5-meter buffer either side. So we were very happy about that. And we are seeing that yellow crazy ants are still consuming liquid bait along the rivers. And in the areas with the dark spots where they've consumed the most bait, we saw lower yellow crazy ant activity in those areas. So I'd like to finish with a quote from Henry Ford. Coming together is a beginning, keeping together is progress, working together is success. And this is really what we saw in Vallée de Mai during the baiting, is that several departments of Vallée de Mai came together. So we had field workers, we had hospitality, the research team, people from head office, all coming together to achieve the baiting. And I think that's key moving forward in a world with increasingly daunting challenges and threats far greater than ourselves. We have to remember that we're all in it together, and we're striving towards the same goal. So that's it from me. Thank you.
Hi. So my name is Monica Griffith. I'm going to be talking about monitoring the Seychelles black parrot, particularly during the time of COVID-19. So I'm just going to start with a brief overview of the history of the black parrot monitoring. So we started in 2009, and at the time they were thought to be a subspecies of the Vassar parrots from Madagascar and Comores. So they were officially Chorocopsis nigra. But in 2014, due to genetic analysis and supported by SIF, they were declared they're a separate species. So then they became Chorocopsis bartlei. So they're relatively young in species terms. In 2018, we had a new population estimate. So that's a few over 1,000. It's really not very many, and they are all found on Pralin Island. We've assessed as Aurélie already talked about, so using the phenology, we assess the food availability, looking particularly at the native and endemic fruit available to the parrots, and how that this can be changing as climate changes and will affect their breeding over time. But the majority of the monitoring focuses on the breeding season and on the importance of ringing. So in the project so far, we've ringed, actually that's now wrong, 337 have been ringed so far. This allows us to look at their movement around the island, their dispersal, social interactions. If you see a group of parrots, is it always the same group? Are they spending time with their friends, or is it just kind of random? This map is of Pralin, and it shows us all of our misnet locations to where we put the rings on. The pink spots are from this season. The blue spots are from all the previous seasons. So you can see that we have a big distribution of nest knitting locations across the island. So that helps us. But we've still got a lot to discover. Oddly, we still don't know how long these birds live for. We have birds that were ringed in 2010 as adults, so at least at 1 year old, and they're still flying around. We still see them regularly. So all we know is that they live for at least 12 years, but we don't know any more than that. We don't really know what their reproductive constraints are. We don't think it's cavity availability, because we monitor a lot of cavities that are not used every year. But if things like, say, the common myna start to come into the forest and use the cavities, then this could become a problem later on. And we're also beginning to look now into the causes of low breeding years. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. So there's a rundown of the actual breeding. So the season goes from roughly October to March, give or take a couple of weeks on either side. The first indication is that their beaks start to turn from brown to yellow. So this is their outer breeding season colors. And you can see that's quite a different, it's the only difference on them. The rest of them stays brown. And the females then begin to call. So as the beaks are changing, then you start to hear breeding calls, which is quite interesting to listen to. So every single breeding female has a unique call that you can identify her by. Once you're good at picking them out, you can hear the difference between them rather than you can't see the difference. So you start to hear them calling roughly in November, and then you hear them more and more. They begin to start exploring cavities, to start looking for somewhere to live, and maybe modifying cavities if they think, if they kind of need to open it up a little bit more or something. By December and January, we expect to see roughly up to 3 eggs in a nest, and we get fledglings by the end of February or by March. We've got a few issues that we face though. So we're looking at food availability. So that's with the phenology. Possibility on the cavity shortage, but again, it doesn't seem to be an issue right now. But one issue that we know is a big problem is predation. So we have invasive rats and cats on the island. We know that they can cause havoc to our birds. So these were 2 active nests before they became dinner. And then rats often move into the nests and use them as their own nest. Cats can just pick them out very easily. And again, so then we'll still look on the causes of the low year. This is a short video of one of my nests from last year. So you can see this here is a female, and she's feeding her chick 2 days before it fledged. So she's called him up to the top of the tree of the cavity to give him some food. And then later on that night, he got a visitor. Thankfully, because the chick was so old, because it was 2 days from fledging, then he did seem a little bit stressed the following day, but he did survive. But if it had been a younger chick or eggs in there, then it would have killed him. So we know that the rats are a big problem. What we don't know is how much of a problem. And we're wary of assuming that the problem with the breeding success here is only due to rats. So we've been doing a rat trapping trial over the past, this is the 3rd year now. We split the active nests that we find into 4 levels of rat trapping. So we have high intensity rat trapping, medium, low, and then a control group with no rat trapping. These are our results so far. So you can see that where we have high intensity rat trapping, we have more nest success, but we still have the occasional failure. And where we have no rat trapping, we get more failed nests, but we do still have success. So it's clearly not so cut and dried as when you take the rats away, they're all fine. We really struggled to get nests in this medium intensity category, so we're going to try and increase those numbers next year. This graph of the sum total, the breeding activity since the start of the project. It shows us quite an interesting thing that we hadn't picked out before. So we seem to have 3 good breeding years with a low breeding year on either side of it. We predicted, so last year was this year, was the 3rd year in a row of good breeding levels. So we predicted that the coming year, the one that we've just had now, would be a low year, and we were correct. We had absolutely no breeding attempts this year, this season, which was a bit of a shame. But it's certainly very interesting that it did seem to fit into the pattern that we were thinking it would, but it's still something to keep an eye on, so to keep watching. So this season 11 is the one that we've just had. We did predict it would be a low year, and it was indeed. It was an incredibly low year, but it was also a bit of an odd year. So we got some beaks beginning to turn yellow in October, but maybe only half of them, and normally it's all of the adults. We also began to hear an occasional breeding call, but you expect to hear them in November. We were hearing them in January, and it was only some rather than lots. It was all very peculiar. Then we began to hear them more in March, which is unheard of. We're still hearing them now. Not entirely sure what's going on. We began to see indications of breeding in an area called Zimbabwe just before the lockdown began, so in that week. Unfortunately, we didn't have a chance to follow up on this, which is a real shame. So this is a bird that we caught things on. You can see this is his tail. His tail feathers are pretty worn out. Some of them are broken off entirely. It's very ragged. This is what we expect to see when they've been climbing up and down inside a cavity. But this was at the end of, no, in the start of April. It's just is the wrong time of year. They shouldn't, they're not normally doing it at that time of year. So we're not entirely sure what's going on with this. One suspicion could be relating to the phenology again, is that we've spotted a link between one of the native palm fruits and the breeding. So with the rain has been quite haphazard this year, and we think that that has then affected the fruit, which in turn is affecting the breeding, and so making them sort of come into breeding at funny times of year. So lockdown was a bit of a lost opportunity in regards to the monitoring work that we could do. Obviously, it resulted in no reduction in mist netting and observating of the birds, and the lockdown coupled with the YCA work immediately after meant that we had nearly close to 2 months of no monitoring. But during the lockdown, I was hearing around our house, driving me crazy, I was hearing multiple breeding calls. So we heard this one. And then I'd also hear this one. So you can hear they're quite different calls. They were clearly breeding calls, and it really upset me because I couldn't leave the house to follow them and see where they were going. I would also see birds with pale beaks around the house and mutual feeding, both of which are the breeding indicators again, and just shouldn't be happening in April. One thing we're beginning to wonder now is maybe that the low year is actually a late year, because at the end of May, we saw this. So we had a bird that we saw apparently looking in a cavity, prospecting it, on the 25th of May. We got an infrared camera and had a look inside. And so this is a bird on the base of a cavity. This is, so you can see her beak is very pale here. So she's clearly got a yellow beak. This is 6 months wrong. She should have been sitting here in November, but this was at the end of May. And we are pretty mystified as to what's going on with this, but we suspect that climate is playing a part in it. The lockdown wasn't an entirely lost opportunity. There was a bit of a silver lining. So I've been wanting to do a big overhaul of data for a long time, which wasn't fun, but needed to be done, and meant I spent 3 weeks staring at a screen that looked like this, comparing different data sets. And it enabled some data-related discoveries and just sort of cleaning up things, which was very useful, if not fun. And then, so I've just got a bit of a rundown of the project in numbers so far. So since the start of the project, we've ringed, well, now 337 parrots, unique rings around the island. A lot of them are still flying around. We've monitored 278 cavities, so they are predominantly in dead cocoa trees like this. A lot of them are upsettingly tall, so this is my colleague Terence and me at the top of a ladder trying to look inside a cavity. Occasionally we get rewarded with a little egg at the bottom. Of those cavities so far, in 11 years, we've had 133 nests with these horrific looking dinosaur things at the bottom of them. 93 fledglings, which all started out life looking like that. My favorite picture ever. So that's all from me. Is there any questions for me or for either of my colleagues?
Thank you, Aurélie, Constance, and Monica. Any question from the participants for these three ladies?
Thank you, though, for sharing that, all the challenges that you've been up against during the COVID lockdown. It's amazing what you were able to do in the research and, like you said, catching up on paperwork. But it is a shame the challenges that you faced in that. No, it was really interesting. Thank you so much for sharing.
Okay, thank you. Lastly, I will invite Ms. Cecile Caribi, the Principal Secretary for the Department of Culture, to say just a few words for the closing remarks.
Thank you, Betsy. First of all, I would like to thank everyone for very interesting presentations. I've learned quite a lot, especially in regards to the Aldabra cleanup project by Craig. I had the opportunity to watch what was happening on TV, but it was very interesting to see how you were able to mobilize funds and, you know, to get people on board on that. I think these are valuable lessons that we could, at the Department of Culture and other sections, also try and understand and learn from these experiences. I'm very impressed with the work that's been done by the SIF crew. I want to say thank you to them and to, you know, soldier on. I know it's not easy, especially under what we're calling the new normal. At the museum as well, I think we have our challenges, especially I think with Nicole, on how we're going to keep up the outreach program, especially now with the restrictions being put on us with the Department of Health. So we may call upon our partners as well to see how we may continue the outreach and the education and raising awareness of the youth. As Nicole rightly put it, they are our custodians of our environment for the future. I know it's almost 5 p.m., so I would like to thank everyone that has stayed behind for this presentation. Thank you very much for everyone that took the time to prepare such interesting presentation for us. I do hope that we're able to share this recording, Betsy, so that a lot of more people will have the opportunity to listen and really learn about the valuable work we're doing to preserve our environment. Last but not least, I would like to say a big thank you to Caroline for always being our support. She's always ready to support us whenever we have our programs. So thank you, Caroline, and thank you, Terry, as well, for coming on board. So that's it for me. So I wish you all a good, those that are going home, a good entry, and like we always say, keep safe. And thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Ms. Kadebi. And thank you, everybody, for your presentation and all your remarks. Thank you so much. We'll see you for the next webinar.
Thank you.
Stay
Bye.
safe and bye.
Bye. Bye.